Welcome to Conversations with Contemplatives. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Lama Liza Baer, who was supported by Sutter Foundation to do a retreat from 2015 to 2018. If I'm correct, Liza has a degree in environmental studies and then trained as a body worker before retreat, and has continued her Buddhist and teaching activities since coming out of retreat. And we will learn all about that. Lama Liza, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about your life before retreat, what drew you to kind of a spiritual path or Buddhist path, and how you heard about 3-year retreat and what inspired you to pursue that training.
Great. I grew up in Illinois, in northern Illinois, and always felt a little out of place in the society. And when I finished high school, I went out west and was really excited to find, community and places that lived in a healthy way, and was fairly disappointed to not easily find that, and to see really how much our society is harming the earth and kind of creating really negative people situations, also like not really supportive. And so I started in environmental science, and then I ended up switching to botany and ecology. I was really drawn to learning about the interconnectedness of plants and communities, and just like the whole environment of the earth. And then when I graduated from university, I decided to go do a yoga teacher training, because I felt like I decided not to continue with science, because it felt like they were like this kind of significant aspect of what I would now call like the nature of mind, like kind of our own awake consciousness was not like a factor in the science that I was around. It was more materialistic based. And so I went to a yoga teacher training in Mexico for a month, and that was where I really encountered the spiritual path. It was where I first was introduced to meditation, and one of the teachers there was the first person I met who was like a little bit awake. Like I had like a glimpse of someone who was actually present and kind of resting in awareness, and that's how I would describe it now. And so that was when I knew that I had found like that was the direction that I was going in my life. And try to keep it short, I ended up going to a program in Kauai, on Hawaii, the Pacific Center for Awareness and Bodywork. And it was a 6-month program in the framework of learning structural bodywork, but it was interwoven with self-inquiry, meditation, somatic psychology practices. And so a lot of tuning into one's experience and learning kind of how to navigate the inner world. And so that training really changed my life, and I'm very, very grateful for it. And so I stayed there as a student teacher and then as a teacher. And then I went actually to Mexico again to do a breathwork training. And while I was doing that training, I sublet my room to someone who ended up being a student of Tsoknyi Rinpoche. And so that's how Tibetan Buddhism kind of started to gradually come in. And he had a tanka of white Tara that he had given to his mom, but his mom never really hung up. And so he had hung it in my room and decided to gift it to me. And so white Tara really has been kind of shown up over and over again along this path. And so then I started feeling called to go to India. So the next year I flew to Nepal and I met my brother. My brother had been teaching English in South Korea, so we converged in Bodhanath near the stupa. And we spent 5 months going to different retreats. That friend connected me with different retreats that were happening and teachings. I went to teachings with Tenga Rinpoche and decided to take refuge there. And I still didn't really understand pretty much anything of what was being said in the teachings. Um, but I could feel that there was some essential truth there. And so for me in that moment, the taking refuge was committing to being awake, committing to really have this as the center of my life, in this life. And so then I came back and worked for a little bit, and then I went back to India and Nepal and spent another 5 months, going to different locations, kind of on a pilgrimage. But it really felt like all of the all of the gunk of samsara in my being was stirred up by being in India and Nepal. And um, Ladakh really was a place that deeply fell in love with. It. I was struck by how much the culture felt imbued with loving kindness, and it really felt like, if it felt like my heart had kind of come home. It's like my being relaxed in a way, and so that was very influential and nourishing to experience that kind of culture. Um, and then, kind of long story short, I ended up in Southern Oregon and then up in Portland, and I went to some teachings at KCC, Kagyu Changchup Chuling, on the 7 points of mind training. And it was a weekend retreat. And that first night, the teacher was talking about ultimate bodhicitta. And it it felt like coming home. I was kind of like hit with this wave of like, oh, these are the teachings I've been looking for. I hadn't even fully realized that I was looking for them. And so I started working with that teacher and went to different retreats. And the KCC had spent, I think, over a decade getting a retreat land and then building the retreat center. KCC is connected with, it was first established by previous Kala Rinpoche in the late 70s, early 80s. And then they had a close connection with Boka Rinpoche, the Lama Michael Conklin. And so Boka Rinpoche encouraged Lama Michael and KCC to build a 3-year retreat center. And so, of course, they thought it would take a couple years and then they would start a retreat. And I think it ended up taking maybe 15 years to actually get the 3-year retreat happening. And the teacher that I was working with, she said later that, I had like the perfect conditions to go into retreat. For me, it felt like nothing in my life was working. Like I didn't like where I lived. I didn't have a partner. I was going to sell my car anyways. Like I didn't like my job. Like nothing. Like I felt like it felt like nothing was actually working. And in being in retreats over the summer, I felt more and more deeply like this is what, like this is the place to go deeper into, what's happening with habituated patterns, what's happening with reactivity, and how to actually get to the essence of it and transform it. So I decided to do the retreat, and then I had 6 months to take apart my life, prepare to go into retreat for 3 years and raise $50,000. And I'm grateful to Saja for helping with part of that amount. And I also did fundraisers and got scholarships through donations. And it really felt like a miracle to be able to go in. And in the first days of walking into the retreat, like I knew that was what I'd been looking for. And so I feel extremely grateful to have had the conditions come together to be able to do it.
So how would you say true retreat was talked about before you went? And how did that compare to the actual experience you discovered in retreat?
Right. Oh, that's a good question. What I remember was people talking about sleeping in a box, sitting upright, and waking up at 3 in the morning. And I was like, oh God. I guess the first time I heard about it actually was when I was in Nepal. A friend, Justin, mentioned, I think they had a 3-year retreat center at Tenga Rinpoche Center where we were. Um, And he said that 3-year retreat is where you learn to do the rituals and play the instruments and like make tormas and things. And I remember thinking like, why would anyone want to do that? And so, in more in the way that it was kind of talked about at KCC was like an opportunity to step away from all of the worldly kind of tasks that we have to take care of and to be able to go deeply into practice. And our retreat was unique in that they pared down the curriculum. So many retreats are very full with learning practices, and we had a simplified um, number of practices that we learned, and so we had more time to go into each of them, which I think had pluses and minuses. So I have some complaints about that too, but something goes good.
Schedule started at 3 or 4 in the morning, and
We
you
started at 4.
at 4, and you slept. So talk a little bit. I mean, a couple of the people we've spoken to have referred to this meditation box, and people might get a funny idea. So how would you describe your meditation box?
Yeah, it more kind of feels like a mini meditation throne. It's like, there's like a mat with like short sides, and then up in the back, it's kind of like a winged chair almost. And it had cushions all around. Um, and then I had pillows that I would lean against. But we also had the option of having a mattress if we wanted, and so I did both. My family has a history of problems with circulation in the legs, and I found that my legs would ache if I slept sitting up too much. So
Yes.
yeah.
So let's talk about the experience in retreat, and what worked, what was really inspiring for you, and what were some of the challenges, that things that were more difficult in retreat.
One of the most difficult parts was I was chronically exhausted. I I wonder like if I had more meditation experience, maybe I wouldn't be struggling as much and exhausting myself during the days. Um, but I was very tired because the schedule was from 4 a.m. until around 9:30 at night. And I'm not really a napper. I think if I could have taken naps in the breaks, maybe I could have done it better, but that was definitely a struggle. Um, but I also found that by being exhausted, I kind of got to the point of like loosening my reactivity because I was like, oh, who cares? It's fine. I don't have the energy for that. um, and I found I loved really having all of the basic needs met, like having 3 meals a day. I've never eaten so balanced in my whole life. I felt amazing just from having meals made with so much love. We had really, really, really supportive and wonderful staff also. And having that consistent schedule, it feels like the body really likes that, like really having a consistent schedule. and and then our only job was to discover how to be awake and how to lessen suffering. And so it was really extraordinary to be really held in this sea of blessings. Like it felt like in the 3-year retreat, there's a Vajra fence that's established, kind of visualized around the retreat center, and it felt like we were held in this stream of blessings. Sometimes I joke that I felt like I was in this sea of blessings being pummeled by waves of compassion. Because like I learned to be careful of what I kind of prayed for or aspired to, because it would come up very quickly. And sometimes it was kind of challenging. And so I got to see so clearly how like my own behaviors and reactions and kind of ways of interacting with the world really does create these responses, kind of in return. So got some kind of direct experiences of that interconnectedness and the play of karma.
If people hear about retreat, often they hear about the long days, or the in the early days there was often no heating in retreat, or or the sleeping sitting up, and they think of the physical challenges as what's difficult, but in fact what's difficult is sitting facing your own mind day in, day out, month in and month out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then that interacting with other people's minds. Like being, being with the same people like every single day for 3 years. It's extraordinary how well you get to know each other.
Describe a little bit in retreat. Most of the time you're in your own room. Describe a little bit the how that works between the meditation sessions. When are you with other people? When are you on your own? I mean, you were in a kind of a 5-star retreat center. It took a decade to get it together,
Yeah.
but there was just a lot of energy and attention. And as you said, having a staff, having cooks, having attendants, so that you were well taken care of. But talk a little bit about the life, how much you're on your own, how much you're with the others.
Yeah. Yeah, so we it was a beautiful retreat facility. All the cabins were insulated. I've heard stories of your retreat where there was like ice on the inside of the cabins in the winter. So we had heating and windows that closed, um, and so there were independent cabins kind of inside this fence, and then a main shrine room and shared dining hall, bathroom, and bepkang, like yoga room. And we there were 4 main sessions through the day. In those sessions were we did like the practice we were concentrating for that week or month. And so we did that same practice 4 times a day. And then interspersed in there were shorter practices. So like there were practices we did in the mornings, um, and then in the evenings and at different times of the day. And then there were 2 group practices, Green
So,
Tara.
all of that was on your own, in your own rooms.
All of that was on our own. Yeah. And then Green Tara and Chajupa, the 6 arm Mahakala, were the 2 group practices that we did. And so we did those every single day. And we were just a Shankpa retreat. So we did a little bit of the Karma Kagyu practices. We did Milarepa, but we didn't do the Karma Kagyu protector practice. Um, and so Green Tara was in the morning before breakfast, and then Chajupa was in the afternoon before dinner. Um, for me, and then we did like group group soaks, like group pujas, several times a month. And my ears were injured a few months into the retreat, and so I developed really severe case of hyperacusis, which is like sensitivity to sounds. So I ended up not being able to be in the shrine room with the group practices. So I did all the group practices on my own. So I really got to learn how to make tormas and do the rituals, which was actually a blessing. It was really wonderful. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or comments about retreat before we move on to post-retreat?
Um, it really feels like the most extraordinary and wonderful experience. I'm so, so, so grateful to have been able to do through your retreat. And I really, really hope that they continue. Because I think there's lots of benefit of doing intensive practice on your own, like in a solitary retreat or in daily life, and being able to be in a cloister in an environment like that, I think is such an extraordinary blessing. And so part of my kind of life wish, heart wish is to help support through your retreats to continue to happen.
Often people coming out of retreats say the most difficult and challenging is leaving retreat. And then, of course, the challenge of post-retreat, which is a whole other topic. So talk a little bit about your coming out of retreat and post-retreat.
Yeah, I had heard that. For me, I felt it was magical. I had like my first year coming out of retreat was just so magical. Um, I I had the very good fortune um, to be connected with a Dharma center in Southern Oregon, and so it was like when I got the letter of invitation from the Lamas in Southern Oregon to come down there, I think I probably cried because it was so wonderful to know that I didn't have to like go get a job immediately and like pay rent, and to be able to go be part of a Dharma community. And so I first came up to Vancouver to go over the some of the teachings and practices and go deeper into some of the aspects, and got to go over to Salt Spring Island and spend some time at that retreat center for a month and meet Korean Kala Rinpoche. And then I went down to the retreat center in Ashland, and they invited me to stay in the guest studio above the Dharma Center. And it was just wonderful to be part of the community. And
So if I understand, they basically provided a place for you without obligation, but at the same time welcomed you into learning a teaching role and participating in the activities of the center as you felt comfortable doing that.
yeah, what the original invitation was for 6 months, basically till the end of the year of 2018, and they gave me a small stipend to help with food, which was very kind. Um, and then it was basically just a space to land, and then it felt really harmonious. Like, I think both for the sangha and just for kind of my role and my presence in being there. And so they invited me to stay longer. I think I went to visit family for the holidays, so they invited me to come back after that. And then gradually um, they invited me to start teaching. I think they first to teach like one, lead a calm abiding, and then lead a class. And so kind of gradually more and more doing teaching and sharing. And eventually they gave me the role of associate Lama. And so I was there for about 4 years, and uh, eventually started taking over teaching a 6-week class where I could really kind of explore any topic that felt relevant. And that was a huge gift. The lamas there really supported me to find my own voice and share my the blessings and things that I learned and experienced in retreat, and freedom to create new things. Like I created an introduction to meditation workshop that was really successful, and a half-day meditation practice once a month. And so I feel extraordinarily grateful to have really had the container to learn how to articulate the kind of experiences that I had discovered by being in 3-year retreat.
That's one of the kind of misconceptions that some people have, is they go through 3-year retreat and then just naturally come out as a teacher, whereas there's nothing about the retreat training in itself that is teacher training, right?
Right.
All
Yeah.
interpersonal work.
Yeah. Yeah. I was very grateful that I had done many years of one-on-one sessions with people, because I had done body work and breath work and different kinds of healing modalities. And so I already had a lot of skills and knowledge in how to interact and talk with others. And like I'd already led groups. To come out cold and like to have never done that before, that's pretty, that would be pretty challenging.
And that's interesting. I mean, that brings up another point that often is not thought about by people thinking about, young people thinking about going into retreat, is if you have no kind of real world skills before you come in, then you come out and you're really at a loss. Whereas if you have some real world skills that you can then kind of work with or work through post retreat, that's very important.
Right. Yeah, I do think it's useful to have training. But I also think when, by going into retreat for myself, like just being more present and more like at ease within myself, then makes it so much easier to interact in the world. And so even if someone is going in as a younger person and hasn't done training yet, then they can come out and be able to kind of participate in training or like learning different skills, and it'll be way more productive, I would think.
So you're a millennial, kind of younger in terms of the kind of often average age. A few years ago, it was a lot of young people. I mean, when I began, we were all young. But these days, um, often people are older when they manage to organize their lives to do retreats. So what do you think, what are some of the specific perspectives from a millennial that you uh, can share with us?
Right. Yeah, it seems like the main group of people that are still connected with Buddhism are from your generation. And so that generation has just aged, you know. And so Dharma centers are really facing that right now. I'm working at KCC now, and we're basically our volunteer base is kind of dissolving because people are aging out, and so then where do you how do you work with that? Um, but more to your question, I mean, I guess one of the hardest parts is I don't really have peers who have done what kind of have any kind of relatable experience. 'Cause I have friends who are practitioners and things, but um, I was the youngest by far of everyone who did our retreat, and I know a few people who are um, about a decade ahead of me. Um, and so there's connection there, but um, that there is a bit of isolating is not quite the right word, but it would be great to have more peers and more kind of sangha to walk with in this path because I'm kind of figuring it out on my own quite a bit. And I also feel like, you know, so much is going on in our world, and it's not looking great in a lot of the aspects of what's happening. And part of why I felt inspired to do this retreat and why I think that these practices are so helpful is um, these practices really help to clarify our own reactivity and biases and blindnesses. And so if we're bringing our own kind of veiled view um, to what's happening in the world, then we could just be perpetuating the challenge or the confusion. And so I think the more that we can be present with our own suffering and our own confusion and like relax inside of ourselves, then we can be more skillful in the challenges that we're facing in the world. And so it feels like kind of an essential activist training, really.
I mean, thinking of your interest in ecology before and thinking that we're all very much conditioned by the environment that we grow up in. And so the boomers grew up in a very affluent and easy environment. And young people growing up now, as you say, with the challenges, the climate changes, the climate challenges, the political challenges, all the challenges that are present in the world. Um, I would expect there would be a much sharper kind of sense of that and urgency, sense of urgency that
Right.
maybe the generations did not have so acutely. Um,
Right. And I think people would potentially argue it's a reason not to go into 3-year retreat because there's an urgency of um, kind of activity and awareness out in the world. And I agree with that. And by doing 3-year retreat, you know, it's really 3 years is a long time, and it's also not a long time in the grand scheme of things. And by doing that depth of practice, one learns so much and then becomes this embodiment of wisdom and compassion and skillfulness that can then be in the world and be more skillful. Yeah. So I'm a supporter of doing practice.
So you moved from the Ashland Center where you were in more of a teaching role, and now you've taken on an administrative role to learn new skills in the Portland Center, and you're still looking at ways of having an impact on kind of in the environment or environmental awareness.
Yeah, I so earlier this year I came up to the Portland area and I'm now the executive director of KCC. Um so definitely a very different role, a lot more computer work and taking care of details. But it is wonderful to interact with the community in this way, kind of a new supportive role. And part of what I really appreciate about KCC is there's space to do like to kind of bring in social awareness and activism into practice. The community is really interested in that, and we haven't done anything yet specifically around environmentalism at the Portland Center, but where I live in Corbett, I am doing some like smaller guided meditations, and a friend who's kind of like a natural plant person and farmer, we're gonna co-lead like a nature meditation walk together. And so there's still a lot of space and exploration. I'm really interested in how to be awake in the world as it is right now, and what does that look like. And I think that connecting with the natural world is so like essentially supportive in this kind of ineffable like realm with beyond concepts.
And do you think that some approaches like that might kind of have more resonance with the younger population?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's when I explore this question a lot, because there still aren't a lot of young people who come into the meditation centers, and yet people are very interested in meditation practice and um, in kind of the spiritual path. But I think I don't want to get too political, but I think some of it is there's so much kind of baggage with religion, and and I think I think that younger generations really are tired of all of the scandals and all of the hypocrisy, and are really interested in like what's the essential practice, like what are we actually really doing here. And I think also, seeing the reality of climate change and what's happening so quickly, like wanting things that are actually addressing and paying attention to what's happening. And so more and more those conversations are happening, and teachers are beginning to lead Dharma talks and retreats and teachings that are relating to that. And I think it's a huge niche that would benefit from more exploration.
Right. I think it looks like you have your work cut out for you.
I think so. Yeah.
Next generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Liza, this has really been very rich and delightful. And thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you. Pleasure to talk with you. Thank you.